Get out! Us? Nope. These aren't just random words, but in fact, the names of Jordan Peele's 3 movies that he's produced, and I will be reviewing them today. But before we get into that, my name is Makai, I am your host, and this is Kickback and Watch It, the show where I review movies, so you don't have to. Before we do that, I just need to make sure you've already subscribed to our channel, so go ahead and just leave a little like and a comment down below so we know what works and what doesn't, because if it's not working, we're gonna fix it. Okay? Okay, let's get started. Get Out. So one of the biggest themes in Get Out for me was this idea of a post-racial America. This was like right after Obama, and a lot of white liberals were feeling very bold in their commitment to anti-racism. Throughout this movie, we are presented with these well-meaning white people in the form of Rose's parents. And what I liked about this sort of subversion of that expectation that, you know, they need to be these backwoods country racist bumpkins, I really appreciated the fact that Jordan Peele used this sort of more liberal version of the white man in order to get the message across of this story. I was very, very interested in how he used those themes of covert racism in order to kind of layer in the horror with this film. However, the hypnosis of the sunken place was really where the metaphor kind of enlivened for me. I was noticing how when Chris initially sinks, she's talking to him about his past. And I think this is something that happens a lot today with white people, where we as black people will be in conversation with them and they'll just kind of, they'll be unaware, or maybe they are aware, I don't know if they're aware, maybe they are aware, but they're unaware of how the things that they say and the actions that they take kind of manifest in this discomfort. So when I watched the film initially, I thought the theme was the literal consumption of black people, because as you know, historically, white people did used to eat black people, that is a fact, particularly after lynching, so I wasn't like out of the box. But I think what Jordan Peele was trying to convey was more of this metaphorical consumption of black culture and black people, and this desire to literally be black people. And I think that this is manifested especially just in a recent example. You could even argue like the Super Bowl performance with Kendrick Lamar, and how that was sort of this black superstar icon legend performing, and this was at literally the NFL, one of the whitest institutions in America. Did we forget Colin Kaepernick? Okay, so yeah, I was very interested in this metaphor that Peele was trying to layer into the horror. And I think what was so interesting about this film, and when I watched it first when it came out, was this idea that depending on who you were in that room as a viewer, white or black or whatever race you were, I feel like your experience of the film was very different. And I think that's where the real power of Get Out came in, was just the subtlety in which Jordan Peele layered in some of that horror. So yeah, in the film we can point to the constant consumption of black people and black culture, and this reliance on black people to generate these cultural touchstones. One of the moments I want to highlight in particular was when the blind guy at the auction basically was like, oh, you know, it's not about your skin color, it's just about the fact that, you know, you've got a strong body and strong eyes, and how that ignorance of like not seeing color literally kind of contributed to Chris's subjugation towards the middle and end of the movie, or potential subjugation. Obviously, we had the other 2 black people who were literally sunken. So yeah, and we're gonna get into that too. The more I thought about it, I think the film really is a metaphor on double consciousness. W.E.B. Du Bois defines it as the struggle African Americans have to remain true to their culture while at the same time conforming to the dominant white society. With this in mind, Chris is kind of forced below himself, obviously sunken. He's forced below himself and made to kind of disassociate from the reality that he's currently facing in this household. And also too, just like with the gaslighting, when you remember, you know, Rose hiding the phone and making sure it wasn't charged, like all of that kind of plays into this idea of knowing as a black person that in white space or in mixed company, you're not always the safest. And there are some things that you kind of do have to be aware of as a black person that white people maybe aren't so aware of in those spaces. It's also worth noting that he was forced into this state by Chris's mother. This was not an equal exchange. She literally hypnotized him and sunk him below. And so today, the relevance of this today, I just think that this is something that we're seeing a lot recently with just Black people being kind of forced to have this awareness and this social awareness. I think with the conversation around DEI and just what it means to be a person of color or a minority in this country, Black people are really at the forefront of these conversations, talking about, what does it mean for you as a person who claims to be a white ally and claims to be, progressive or whatever that looks like, liberal, how are you actually showing up in this space? Because the talk is talking and the walk ain't walking. So that's my take on Get Out. If I were to rate it, when I first saw it, I probably would have given it 8. Watching it recently, I think I'm gonna give it an 8. It was still pretty good. It holds up. So yeah, that's Get Out. Okay, so now we've got the second of the films, Us. Personally, it was my least favorite. I maybe was just a little spoiled from Get Out. I really liked the metaphor and the nuance of it, but Us was kind of on the nose in a way, but as I watched back, I realized that there was a lot more to be had, especially when you know the twist. So this is a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Us somehow, magically, this is a spoiler warning. So overall, the theme of Us for me was the haves and the have-nots. I think that's very simple. You get that with the tethers being literally underground. You have the Wilsons who are above ground. I really, really liked how Jordan Peele used doppelgangers as an example of this metaphor instead of, something like an X-Men maybe, where you've got the normal human and then the weird other thing. It's literally the same person, the same actor even, portraying the same idea or the same being, which I really, really, really was really impressed by. This was like the first movie I think I've seen outside of maybe Parent Trap, where I was like, oh, the same person's playing the character twice, which also, I didn't know Parent Trap, I'm not talking about Parent Trap. I just didn't know that Lindsay Lohan was actually playing herself. I thought she had a twin for the longest time, but we're not gonna get there. So yeah, the tethers are the literal representations of the have-nots. The humans, or the Wilsons in this example, because they are the humans of the story, are the haves. And on paper, the Wilsons are the perfect nuclear family. They're kind of the idealized version of what a family should look like in America: 2 parents, 2 kids, son and a daughter. And I think this is why Adelaide was so ferocious in the way that she was trying to protect her family. Once again, spoiler, but if you don't know, Adelaide is actually a tether. And so Adelaide did the work. I would say you could argue that Adelaide did the work throughout the movie in order to earn what she had, which was a spot in the Wilsons family. And in reversing her position and putting Red, who is technically Adelaide, I'm just going to use Adelaide for the tether and Red for the person who got put underground. But Adelaide putting Red underground was sort of her working her way up out of that system, out of the disenfranchisement of being a tether, that the government, obviously in the movie, the government created the tethers. So her working her way out of underground was her literally coming out of the government subjugation. I wouldn't even say subjugation. In this example, I would probably say it's closer to just inequity, honestly. So yeah, Adelaide was very fervorous in trying to maintain that position in the nuclear family. And in many ways, they're not the perfect family. This is just heightened, I think, in terms of the overall movie by Jordan Peele. So this is heightened by their blackness. I think in society, we've put this picture up of what a perfect family, or well, I guess we can use this, what a perfect family looks like, but they're not a perfect family. And I say this, they're not a perfect family because they're black, but I mean what I mean by that, specifically what I mean by that, is that they're not the perfect family in the eyes of America, the government, whatever, right? We know that black people and historically Africans in history their family, their version of family was more community-based, and you'd have more than just like the mom, the dad, the two kids. You'd have the grandma and the aunt, the neighbor's kids were your kids. And so there is this kind of community-centered approach to family that I think we sometimes lose in today's society. But this is where the kind of film is making its point, right? That Adelaide and her husband Abraham and the two children are trying to fit into this vision of what a perfect family looks like. And so this is why I think their interaction with the Tylers, the other family in the film, the white family in this film, is so important. So in this dynamic between the Wilsons and the Tylers, the Wilsons are trying to keep up with the Joneses. And what that means is they're just trying to be nosy. Oh, what are you doing? How are you? You know, how does your yacht look? You know, how does your boathouse look? And they're trying to the Wilsons are trying to like one up the Tylers. The Tylers have no concept of lack, basically. And so they're very ignorant and just kind of oblivious to what they have, and they don't really know the cost of what they have. By the virtue of the Wilsons being black and being a have-not, they have done the work of actually understanding what it takes to have in the society. So they have in that they're a family, but they have not because they're black. Or that's sort of what the film is positing. So when the Tethers go on their killing spree, this is because of years of repression and lack and inequity in terms of having to eat the rabbit, not having sunlight, being stuffed away. And so they actually kind of have to come above ground. And I'm going to get into that point in a minute. So just to bring it back, I think overall, Jordan Peele was trying to come up with some way to talk about basically the repression of our imperfect selves. I think, again, with the doppelganger's metaphor, when you have the literal yourself, you know, your doppelganger, your embodiment being repressed, subjugated, forced below ground, eventually that's going to bubble to the surface and it's going to come out. And I think in today's society, we see this a lot with a lot of black people kind of selling their souls and not really being authentic to themselves as black people. Shout out again to Kendrick Lamar and the wonderful performance at Super Bowl. But we've seen a lot of black people, not specifically Kendrick Lamar, but you have to watch the performance to know what I'm talking about. You see how people in society are sometimes praised for repressing their black identity, and it's something that I think Peele was trying to come to in this film, saying that you shouldn't repress it because ultimately it's gonna bubble to the surface and kill you, and apparently everyone else. Just a continuation of the thought. But by denying our true selves, by denying that sort of imperfect self, we are putting ourselves more in favor of a more capitalist identity that I think is why the Tylers also were killed as well, because they had no connection to their true selves and their culture. The ending feels a little bittersweet to me because Adelaide herself was a tether, and so the work that she did to get herself up and become a normal person was work that she did, but she still fell victim to the ignorance of the sort of surface people ideology, right? She came above ground, she did her thing above ground, and then she literally forgot where she came from. That is why the Tethers have to come above ground, because they spent so much of the movie and so much of their lives underground that it only makes sense for them to eventually uprise and take their spot back. The uprising in and of itself, the Hands Across America project, is a literal rejection of that system of being repressed. And so in the overall metaphor, I think Jordan Peele, again, very on the nose, you know, people below ground coming above ground to take their spot. But the Hands Across America metaphor is just sort of putting an image to this idea of rejecting the subjugating of the lower class. That's what I'm gonna say on that. If I had to rate Us, oh brother, when I first saw Us, I gave it about a 7.5. If I were to rate it now, I think I'd still give it a 7.5. It really hasn't changed since I've seen it, but I did enjoy the movie, and it's not my favorite, but it's not a bad movie, and that's Us. So, last film, number 3. Nope, my favorite of the 3. Honestly, I just love the sci-fi of it all. It is just such a wonderful encapsulation of science fiction and science horror. Especially, it's very reminiscent of Jaws. And I think Jordan Peele said that Jaws was one of his inspirations on this one. So yeah, good film. So the themes in this movie, again, I thought were very easy to spot. Spectacle, you know, addiction to trauma and trauma porn, and just how people are very, very obsessed with being the next big thing, the next it thing. And I think that there maybe was just a little bit of layering in with just black exploitation, not black exploitation specifically, but black exploitation and the erasure of black culture. And we get that a little bit with OJ, and the horses. Their entire family legacy was basically tied to being the first of all, like Hollywood horse wranglers. Second of all, the first major motion picture that was literally involving a horse. So they, by all sense of the word, should be experts in the field. And you see people with like legacies, you see people like, oh, what's a good example?
Are you talking about Danny DeVito?
Danny DeVito! And this is not like a shot to Danny DeVito, but like Danny DeVito's daughter is a known celebrity, and she has obviously strong connections with Danny DeVito. So you see how like having a legacy in Hollywood gets you things. You could argue that the Haywood legacy as a horse wrangling family, as people who literally practically invented the motion picture, they should have a little more clout. And they have to do this song and dance with these Hollywood producers that give them no respect, no time. Their entire ancestry basically was just ignored in favor of the next shiny thing, which is shady, personally. So yeah, this theme of like black people having to be the spectacle, or black people having to put on this song and dance in order to be respected and valid and paid attention to, is kind of exacerbated by M. At the beginning of the movie, M, when she's kind of coming on set to work this job, she has to basically, you know, put on this show and be like, you know, I'm the cool black person, what's up, I'm gonna be working with you. And OJ's seen as the insufferable, you know, oh, he's not Smiley, he's just this random guy who's on set who thinks he knows everything. But as we see, OJ knows a lot about horses. And he literally is like, this crystal ball moment, y'all gotta cut it, because this horse is gonna freak out. Obviously they don't listen to him. Obviously it's because he's black. And when the horse freaks out on set, like OJ said it would, he gets fired. So that was just one of the ways in which, you know, exploitation and spectacle was bleeding less into the larger theme of, I almost said Blue Jeans from, oh, never mind. Jean Jacket. That kind of bleeds into the larger theme of Jean Jacket, but this was like a very specific, like, race-centered theme in terms of the characters. So Jupe and Jupiter's Claim is another really good example of this theme of exploitation. After OJ is fired from his job, we find out that he's basically been selling Jupe these horses, which, not really a spoiler, but as we find out later in the movie, Jupe has been feeding these horses to Jean Jacket. So OJ's been supplying the horses, Jupe's been feeding them the Jean Jacket, and then Jean Jacket's been eating them, which you could argue also is probably part of what caused Jean Jacket to spit out all of that stuff and kill OJ's father. So this theme of exploitation, this theme of like having the black person supply the labor, supply the work, supply the skill, and then someone else reaping the benefit from that is, again, very prevalent in this theme with Jupe. So to kind of continue with that metaphor, I think this is one of the more easy to see metaphors of the film in terms of spectacle, but you have the Gordy incident. And Gordy obviously goes off, he's a chimpanzee, he freaks out, he basically like maims the cast, and Jupe, played by Stephen Young, he is basically traumatized, and in that traumatization, in that moment of going through this experience with this ape, I think from like a macro perspective, I think the character sort of believed himself to be not invincible, but there's this way in which like surviving a tragedy or surviving a trauma, surviving something like that gives you this false sense of like invulnerability, you know, or if I survive this thing, then I can survive anything. And this again is a very clear, very simple metaphor, but it just heightens the overall metaphor of the movie. But this belief that Jupe had is what made him essentially like lead to his death with Jean Jacket, right? He thought that he was above the power of this force of Jean Jacket, and he was feeding up these horses, and Jean Jacket punished him because Jean Jacket knew like, you ain't shit, human, and I'm more powerful than you. So that's what got Jupe killed, basically. But that, again, it's just heightening that same spectacle metaphor. So this is mirrored with OJ and M. The difference between OJ and M in this situation is that OJ and M are historically disenfranchised. And M, but okay, let me walk it back. Yes, Steven Yeun is Asian, we got that. But the difference between these two situations is that in Juke's experience of that trauma through Gordy, he falsely believed himself to be at the same level or in the same kind of world as Jean Jacket. OJ and M never saw themselves as above Jean Jacket and always recognized the power that Jean Jacket held over their lives, and also the role in which Jean Jacket played in killing their father, which again they didn't find out until later. That's why he died from what he died from. So I think in terms of them also pursuing this spectacle, pursuing this photo of Jean Jacket, I think the reason that they were spared is because their legacy had been erased. And so because they had that sort of, they had, in an interesting way, they'd actually paid the price in advance by having their legacy as the Haywood horse wranglers, that historic legacy erased and removed. By having that happen, they were almost getting like recompense, or they were getting reparations basically in getting this photo, right? This is their land, this is their horses, this is their situation. Obviously, like Jupe and the whole Jean Jacket situation of it all messed up their lives. So getting this picture, while yes, still on that same trauma porn, wanting spectacle, wanting the big hot thing, they're justified in that because, again, they've been undercut by not receiving their just due. And this is why they were able to succeed at the end. So there is an irony that comes with M having to use the well camera to get the photo. Obviously, from the entire movie, we know that their father, their ancestor had basically created the first motion picture, or was a part of creating the first motion picture. So that theme of pictures and photographs and getting it all together at the end was just kind of mirrored in a very interesting circular way. So it all kind of came back to itself, and that's why I think obviously they succeed. Obviously they were the main characters, they weren't going to die, but I thought it was interesting to sort of justify with each of these movies, like why did the heroes who maybe were experiencing similar things to people who died in the films survive? So if I had to rate this movie, when I first saw it, I think I gave Nope an 8.8. And I think I would still give it an 8.8. It is just such a good film. I love just the wavy, kite-like nature of Jean Jacket. I'd never seen anything like that in a movie before, and just the way he used, the way he transformed the metaphor of the alien, or not even the metaphor, but just the image, the iconography of the alien into this big, I think Neon Evangelion, I don't know the fucking anime title, but that's basically like the metaphor. I'm sure someone will pop it up somewhere around here. But that sort of giant, massive monstrosity, a la Godzilla, a la Mothra, was kind of what was going into the inspo for this film. So that is my trilogy Trinity review. And if you liked it, again, you can always go ahead and hit that like button. You can always give me a comment and let me know, like, what did you think the themes of these movies were? Because they're very divisive.